Welcome to the Samson Strength Coach Collective podcast. We are here with Amm Phrommavanh. Phrommavanh.
Yeah.
So it's not the PH is not, it's just Phrommavanh.
Regular P, yeah.
See, like I was going to ask you prior to starting, but in my mind, I was like, no, you should be able to get this. Like it should all make sense here. I mean, I wanted to see if I could just nail it first try, but all right. So Phrommavanh, you are a strength and conditioning coach, assistant strength and conditioning coach at Georgia State right now with men's soccer, baseball, and softball. Correct there. Down in Atlanta, Georgia, shout out to TI and a bunch of others. You know, it's interesting. I actually, like when I was doing a little digging on Georgia State, I just came across naturally this link of like top 20 most influential musicians from Atlanta. And it's pretty significant, obviously, right? So you've got like I mentioned TI, Ludacris, Goody Mob, Sierra, TLC, Jermaine Dupri. There's probably a couple other who? Outcast. That's the one. Yeah. So you got like Big Boy and Andre 3000. But I thought was interesting, obviously both of us being Connecticut natives, they claim John Mayer. And
Bridgeport. So I don't know if that's allowed.
Yeah, I guess when they count him in the Atlanta scene because of the fact that he left college when him and his friends decided that they wanted to be musicians or whatever, and they moved down to Atlanta to try to pursue the scene there. But obviously we know, from his songs and everything, he's a Fairfield County guy. So I don't know, a little suspect on that. I might have to reach out to the person who put together that article. I'm not afraid to claim John Mayer. I mean, John Mayer is, he's pretty legit. I went to all of his concerts when I was in high school. So, but yeah, so in Atlanta, Georgia. And then I'm going to go through obviously some of your credentials here. We have master's in strength and conditioning from Springfield College in 2019, bachelor's from Central Connecticut State University here in New Britain, Connecticut, right? That's where, yeah. So shout out Connecticut. Obviously I'm a Connecticut native as well, so I appreciate that. I spent some time at Holy Cross, Yukon, Quinnipiac, Elon, and Minnesota. And obviously I'm going to allow you to kind of go through and you'll take us through everything that you've encountered as far as experiences along the way. He is a certified strength and conditioning specialist through the NSCA. And he also holds certifications in reflexive performance reset, RPR, and USA weightlifting. So obviously from here, we're super pumped to have you. Obviously you come from a wide range of experiences and you have some unique experiences like we talked about yesterday on the phone when it came to actually finding ways to reach your athletes and certain goals and desires that you've had over the years and ways that you've kind of overcome some of the obstacles in order to get there. But if you want to just kind of start back from, where this whole thing started and take us through to, where everything you've kind of gone through in order to make your way to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me. First of all, I really appreciate you taking out your time to do this. It's been great catching up with you since you go on now,
No doubt.
Well, I had a little bit of a non-traditional start compared to my other colleagues in strength and conditioning because I wasn't very genetically lucky where I was able to play in college sports. So I didn't really have a strength coach growing up or anything. I didn't really know that was an option for a job. So when I went to undergrad, I actually got into UMass Amherst at first, and I was a journalism major. Quickly found out that wasn't for me, and then I transferred to Central over in Connecticut. And I was lucky enough that my undergrad advisor was a alumni from Springfield College, and he was talking to me about like internships and the things they offer over there. And honestly, being in our area in Connecticut, I was lucky enough to be like less than an hour from all these great schools and all these great coaches around. So my senior year, when I was at Central, I actually ended up doing an part-time internship at Springfield College. And that really opened up my eyes to strength conditioning and what the profession offers and what it entails to actually work there. And I was actually amazed to find out that just about every single strength conditioning coach at Springfield College was an actual GA. Like no one was actually like a full-time coach besides Dr. Thompson, who ran the program at the time. It was all GAs, and I was completely astonished because they all seemed like professionals that were in the field for years and years. And I knew that's what I wanted to be. So after my internship, I asked Dr. Thompson what I had to do in order to get into this program moving forward. So he basically just told me to get as much coaching experience as possible. And after I graduated, I took a gap year in between my undergrad and applying for Springfield, and I interned at UConn under the Olympic sports department, which was a phenomenal experience. And obviously you being at UConn for a while can attest to the Olympic staff over there being there for so long and doing such a great job on the program. It's been great. And then obviously after UConn, I went to Quinnipiac, and the place that you've been as well. And that was probably one of the most influential coaching experience I've ever had with Brajesh Patel over there, working with him and Webster and Nate Kudig, and it was a great experience. From there, I got into Springfield, thankfully, and it helps because there's a lot of the people that I was working around, like, we're also Springfield alumni, and you know how vast that network is, especially in New England, and it definitely helped me get in for sure. And on the way, I was able to intern with Coach Ollie over at Holy Cross, the football staff over at University of Minnesota, and eventually I got my GA position over at Springfield, working with a number of teams over there. And that was a great time for me to learn a lot, to make a lot of mistakes, and to have a lot of great connections and great relationships with my colleagues. And that was one of the greatest experiences I've ever had, because it really kind of led me to where I am right now. After Springfield, I was an assistant sports former coach at Elon University down in North Carolina with Nick DeMarco and the staff there. And from there, I came to Georgia State, working with, as you said, baseball, softball, and men's soccer. And I've been here since August of 2020, so just about a year and a half now.
Nice. That's awesome. And obviously, like you said yesterday, you're enjoying it down there, and everything's kind of coming together. You know, you've got kind of everything being pieced together as far as where you saw your future being, and you're kind of living that out a little bit here.
Exactly. And this is the longest I've ever been at one university. And it's always because, like, I'm so young in the field right now, but it's as long as I've been, it's showing me how much of a change I can make, actually having roots somewhere and being able to see this out. So it's been great.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I mean, obviously, you probably agree, such great exposure, right? Like, unbelievable when you take a look at not just the names, and I don't want to, like, go through and just say, just because you've been around big names, that all of a sudden it, equates to what, it's like, obviously what you took from those situations, and obviously you made them what they were. But yeah, I mean, some of the people that you've been exposed to, the different range of coaching styles and personalities, and it really is amazing what you're able to get exposure to in this field. There's so many good people, and I think it's those people need to obviously be able to get access to those people, and especially young coaches coming into the field. I think it's super crucial that we have access to those guys. So part of that obviously is kind of like what we spoke about yesterday, and a similar theme that I kind of want to lead some of these podcasts, or lead with some of these podcasts, is the idea of an ethos. I do think that it's really interesting when you start to break down mission statements or values or morals of a company, or a athletic program and a strength and conditioning department specifically. There's a lot of I guess the wordage that's tailored to what you're going to provide, what you're going to do for the athlete, what you're going to provide for the sport coach or the sports medicine staff. And all these things are important, and they certainly fall under the procedural or the operational side of things, in my opinion. But more so, what's important, and as I see it, is the idea that you're creating specifically strong human beings, right? And what you plan to be for those people. So I know I kind of posed this question to you yesterday, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on who you are for your athletes, and sort of the direction that you feel you need to head in when it comes to identifying specifically what you demand of your athletes, the standards that you set, and kind of how you guys go about executing that part of the process. Yeah.
And such a loaded question. Like, when we were talking about this yesterday too, I was thinking pretty long and hard about it, because there's so many directions we can go, and there's a lot of things that you can say where it kind of leaks into your overall life and your career as well. But like, one thing that I'm from, like, Naval Ravikant for a while ago, back from one of his podcasts, was that he said something about protecting your time like it's all you have. And that's something that I really kind of hold dear. And like, you can ask my girlfriend, I say this all the time, like, one of my, like, huge pet peeves is, like, wasting time, because it's like the one thing that you can never get back. And that's kind of how I approach how I go into coaching as well. Because, like, I told you guys before, that I didn't play any college sports, so I don't know, like, the demand of being a college athlete, having to go to class, study hall, practice, then lift, and then try and actually find time to do homework, find time to eat 3 or 4, 5 meals a day. Like, all that is time. And if anything, I want to make sure that the time that is spent with me is of high value and will allow them to achieve their goals later on, whether it be them wanting to go into coaching later. Maybe they want to actually take the next step and be a professional athlete, whatever that may be. I want to make sure that whatever time they spend with me, they leave feeling that they've had great use of it, and it was actually a great use of their time, because it's something that I value a lot, and I think that's something that they should too, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of, piggybacking off that, obviously the idea that, yes, your time is super important. College is the one place where everybody's supposed to figure out time management, but it's like, we're asking these collegiate athletes like, hey, not only do you need to figure out time management in terms of classes, emotional obligations, right? Your social construct of, friends, and the dynamic of like being in a new place without your parents for the first time. And it's like, oh, hey, we also need you to learn this playbook. We would like you to understand how we operate from a training perspective. Here's the culture of our program. You're going to be a part of this university, but specifically, you're going to be a part of this, program, the sporting discipline, whatever it is. Right. So, it's a lot to handle, honestly. Like, even as, someone, obviously we both spent time in the college world, it's like, you forget it sometimes, you know what I mean? You almost expect them to operate at such a different level. And maybe at one point or another, you've been exposed to athletes who were able to operate at a level that sort of exceeded what the typical freshman or sophomore coming in would be able to put out there. So, it's a really interesting concept. And I do like the idea of time being part, because again, like when I ask these questions, it's like, it could literally be anything. Like the example I gave you obviously was a Navy SEAL who was talking about the idea of like being on time and doing whatever is necessary to make sure that your brother is taken care of and all of those types of things. But obviously in your particular instance, it's like, you want to give these athletes exposure to understanding your time is valuable. My time is valuable. I don't want to waste anybody's time. I want to give you quality information. I want to give you good direction. I want to be able to put you in a position where you have your hands on the wheel, some ownership, but we're just kind of guiding the bus. So, to go back to what you said before, obviously I'm in the same boat. I was not, I guess I wasn't athletically gifted enough to play college sports, right? I still will, I'll get after and pool basketball, and you can ask B, I'm not bad at 21. You know what I mean? I hold my own a little bit there, not necessarily against B when he's shooting the way he shoots sometimes. Yeah. But, so, the idea of I'm coming into a new role. I haven't played the sport before or had a ton of exposure to the sport previously, but obviously you being who you are, you're generally curious, you're interested, you're trying to find answers, you enjoy taking on different challenges. If that's the case, can you give specific instances of, I know you had talked about wanting to pursue the football route, and, you obviously had certain adversity that you needed to overcome or certain obstacles you wanted to overcome. And then also, where you've gotten to now, where you're working with some sports that you haven't played before either. What's your approach? What is kind of like your mindset when it comes to that stuff? And how do you overcome some of the obstacles that you've come across along the way?
Yeah, obviously, baseball wasn't even one of the sports that, like, not only did I not play baseball growing up, but it's also one that I didn't really watch because my family wasn't really into it. Like, my family loved watching like basketball and football and soccer and stuff like that. So those are the main sports I got exposed to throughout my life, because those are the ones that I watched the most. And then honestly, baseball, I still hear all the guys talking about all these pro guys like back in the day and stuff, and like I just have like a blank face sometimes. Like, I don't know any of these big names that are dropping and stuff like that, and it's tough to get into, because I feel like that's kind of how you become a fan of sports in the first place, is when you're exposed to it as a kid, and then you end up taking it up as a sport that you played yourself, and then that's how you kind of get interest in it. But for me, like, being in our roles, like, a lot of the stuff that we do is general at first anyway, and then we kind of have to work backwards from the sport to get to where we need to be in the weight room and on the field and all that stuff for a physical preparation standpoint. So when I first came to Georgia State, this is also like this is the first time I've ever actually like programmed and worked with baseball like by myself. Like, I've interned with other places too, like when I was at UConn and Quinnipiac working with the baseball teams over there, and I was able to pick up a lot of things from Joel DeMarco, especially when I spent some time with him. But honestly, being able to just take time to actually like spend time with the guys and watch them play, and actually talk to the position coaches and see what the things that they're talking to, like, with the athletes themselves, and trying to be on the same page and speak the same language and really work backwards from the game from there. It's that's kind of the approach that I've taken through for all my sports, and especially with the ones that I have never played or I've never really been a fan of watching. It's something that you definitely have to do more of. And obviously it helps that we're just generally, like, in our profession, we're just generally interested in this, like generally interested in human movement, interested in seeing how the transfer occurs from the weight room and the field training that we do to the sport and stuff. And it's really, it takes a while. And I feel like this being like my going to my second year here, maybe in the longest time I've spent at any school. It's helped that I've been able to also gain some trust from a lot of the athletes and gain some trust, especially from the coaches too. And knowing that like they have trust in me and they have my back and they understand that I'm trying to get the best out of them. I think that helps a lot too, just for overall buy-in standpoint too, especially when they know that I actually haven't had experience playing at the high level like they have, especially too. So.
Yeah, no, it's a great answer. And I think that this is the reason I really wanted to go into this topic a little bit here is because I do think we're getting to a point where there are a lot of coaches out there who are operating in sports that they may have never played or may have not have played at a high level per se. Right. So I think it's important and I think it's a good thing, right? I think we're getting to a point where explanation is starting to trump just experience in general, right? Like, okay, yes, it's cool. You've played the sport or you've played at a high level. This is great. And there's a ton of value that comes from that. There's no doubt about it. I would never deny that. But I don't necessarily think that it's something that is the be all end all, obviously, when it comes, because I mean, you could have 25 years of terrible experience, right? As opposed to somebody who has maybe 2 to 3 years of experience, but has a great ability to explain the things that they believe in, explain and justify some of the methodology and the thoughts that are going on in their mind. And, maybe they see results, right, in a different way and look through a different lens. I almost think, at least in my estimation, I think that individuals, specifically coaches who have not played that particular sport and jump into, so for example, like football, right? Like I had never played it down in football, right? And the goal was to be director of football strength and conditioning somewhere, right? Worked my way up to a top assistant at UConn and never played it down in football in my life. And I think that a lot of that had to do with the fact that people just generally appreciated the idea that, hey, he has no emotional or like emotional ties to anything within the sport. Like he's pretty objective. Like I can be pretty objective with it because like I have no emotional attachment to the sport outside of just simply enjoying it and obviously looking at it from a challenging standpoint. So to bring it back, what are some of the specific ways, if you wanted to almost like take us through step by step, like when you first took on baseball or you first took on football, like maybe it's changed over the years because in the earlier part of your career, you were with football and now you're with baseball. The process in which you take a look at a sport, like you said, identifying the specific demands by working from what I would call like the engine, right? The actual sport itself, and then working your way backwards to try to identify the process of what will be done in order to prepare the athletes for the sport.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is just being able to identify like the biomotor qualities that are required for the sport. So like in this case, I'll probably be talking about baseball a lot because this is the sport I spend the most time with. But like in the case like baseball, like it's one of the most like pure strength and power oriented sports. And that's honestly one of the like most fun things I like to train. Like I love training in the weight room and I especially love like doing speed work stuff. So like having that as a sport is super fun for me because it just allows me to do like all the things that I enjoy doing. And so after looking at that, then I start to look at, it doesn't really, it doesn't apply as much in baseball, but certain things like just identifying work to rest ratios along with if we're able to get any type of GPS data like we were able to at Elon, kind of seeing what the demands that are placed, not just in games, but also in practices too, because usually during a week load of practice is going to be so much higher than they're going to ever face in the game. And then being able to prepare them for that is going to be, I guess, mostly our role in the off season. So it's been a little bit easier having some data to track. And I've been fortunate enough where I've been at universities where that technology is available to us. And it's made our job so much easier, but it's also like what you do with that data that helps too. Cause like if you're just using that data, just kind of like seeing where you're at, but you're not really having these conversations with the sport coaches, not really having conversations with the position coaches that are actually in charge of all this workload. And it's kind of a little bit harder for us to kind of plan and program it out and allow these athletes to be prepared for what they're going to face on the field. So it's a kind of a double-edged thing where you have to analyze data, but also be really good at having conversations and building a relationship with coaches where they can kind of trust you and understanding where they're coming from. And kind of thing, another thing that you said too was like, not having an emotional tie to the sport is also, it's a great thing because like we also don't have any like bad like old school habits that might have presented when we were an athlete in that sport. Like one big example in baseball especially is like conditioning for pitchers and like constantly running polls and all that stuff. So like one of the first things I did was talking to our pitching coach about that, like his idea of conditioning, like what he wants the players to be ready for. And then I am able to kind of like show him the options, like, you know, like running poles and bows is not the only option. There's plenty of other things that we can do. And it helps when we have open-minded sport coaches that are willing to learn some more things. And it's, it really is just how about you go those conversations that truly can matter, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Creating that universal language is huge. I think getting to a point where you guys actually, like you said, you're trying to echo the same sentiments that the coaches are trying to echo. Obviously, everybody operating off of the same philosophy will make it so that the athletes have a better chance to buy in and obviously buy into you. I mean, you even mentioned on the phone yesterday that it gets to the point where some of these baseball players will come up to you and be like, hey, where did you play when you played in college, or where did you play at a high level? So obviously there's a respect there, and it's, getting to the point where you can almost mask the idea that you didn't play the sport. Right. And that says a lot, right? You know what I mean? I think it's you're talking, like I said, there's a ton of value in somebody who's been immersed in their sport and a true love for that craft for, at that point in their life, like 17, 18 years or something like that. So, there's something to be said about them being able to say, all right, well, I understand this particular coach's role in my life and what he can provide. And having them be able to filter those thoughts through and say, hey, like, Amm's going to be here. He's got our best interests in mind. Obviously, he's providing the direction. And I know he's doing the homework to try to emphasize what I need, not necessarily just what he wants. Right. So I guess to kind of go back to what you said earlier, right? You go to the head coach, right? There's a line of communication where you're trying to establish with the head coach. You understand that in some ways, everybody in the building, at least involved with the baseball program, is a coach in general, right? You guys just kind of specialize in different things, right? You have a coach who's, at the end of the day, you're all coaching movement, but in the way you coach that movement may differ and may look a little bit different depending on the context in which you're trying to execute it. So you go to the head coach and you kind of talk to them about, hey, without even looking at any data, right? First things first, so you're just watching the sport and you kind of take a look at the sport of baseball. You notice, well, the work capacity requirements of this sport are pretty minimal. I do notice that there is a large emphasis on speed, power, general strength, whatever the case is, right? And you decide to express that to the coach, and maybe he agrees or disagrees, whatever it is, right? But you guys establish that line of communication as far as like what's going to be expected and what you are going to look at then. Correct me if I'm wrong, is then you start to provide some data that would support your argument or say, hey, like, here's what I'm seeing. These are some of the things that would support my idea that strength and power seem to be the dominating biomotor ability for this particular sport. From there, what would you say from there if you were going to try to break it down? Because now you have some data, right? You've got what you see, you've watched the game, right? You're not just watching the ball, right? You're kind of just like watching players move and obviously taking a look at the different positional requirements. What would you say the next like filter is for you? Now you're kind of going into the idea of creating a physical preparation plan, right? And you're taking a look at some of the qualities you want to develop. You're taking a look at, maybe the time of year, whatever it is. What's kind of like that next step that you go through in order to, again, like zoom in a little bit deeper into what you plan to do for the athletes?
Yeah. The next thing I'd probably do is, I guess, for lack of a better term, kind of bucketing them into different categories when it comes to training in the weight room. So, this is an idea that we've taken from like Zach Dakin when we were at Elon University too, because over there we had like a foundation group and like a foundation plus group and then like 2 advanced groups. So like kind of going back on that, that's what I've started to develop here. And especially in baseball, we're constantly getting a lot of new players. So like this year, I've had on our roster of 39, I've had 17 new kids come in this year. So like whether it be like freshmen or transfers from other schools or grad transfers who are like 23 years old. So like all those new guys coming in, like they are coming from such a different different background of training. Like a couple of them are coming from JUCOs, and other ones come from like LSU, a lot, so like just trying to highlight that some of them come from like really high training backgrounds, and then some come with from facility or from athletic performance that really don't have the resources to provide training like that. So when those new guys come in, one thing that I do is we go through like a newcomer evaluation that we kind of came up together as a staff with JD and then Matt Malden, who was here from our Olympic department, and use that as well as kind of. And I also like just kind of see like how they train over the course of like the first phase. Like even like the new guys that come in, I give them like the foundation or like the freshman card just to see where they're at. And then I kind of evaluate them from there and seeing where their relative strength is at compared to their body weight. And then try and start putting them in where the buckets where they need to be. All that comes with a freshman too, like the 18-year-old freshman, like a lot of them, I think you've probably seen over the years too, that like sports specialization in younger athletes is just like at an all-time high. So like I've had freshmen who have never touched a weight in their life. I've had some freshmen who had, who were able to have strength coaches in high school that have come from great programs. And then I have some that did all of that and went to like their own like specialized strength coaches, like on the weekend or on their days. Obviously they have a huge training background. And like even one of the freshmen that I have right now that just came in, he's like 18 years old. He's the strongest person on the team. Like not even like lower body wise, strongest person on the team. And it's absolutely insane. So like even like I used to think that like, all right, all the freshmen coming in, they have to be in that foundation block, like that basically that ground zero block where they're just doing like body weight movements until they've earned the right to use a bar. But like, not all freshmen are created the same. Like all these guys that come in new aren't all like created the same. So like it just takes a little bit of time and effort to kind of put them in the groups where they need to be. So right now I have my like foundation group, my intermediate group, my advanced group, and I bucket them in those categories based off of how they pretty much are in the weight room. And then and I do take into account too, like some of like other KPIs that I've been recording, just like vertical jump variations and also like different sprint times and stuff like that too. So like being able to kind of put them into those buckets of where they really need to be has helped me kind of develop them for longer term too. And it's also like helped with a little bit more like motivation and buy-in, especially like the stronger freshmen coming in. They're always, oh, like, come on, coach, like I get off this like freshman card, like,
right.
So, like, it kind of helps me. All right, well, you got to do the work to do it, but then you can show it and you can advance like pretty much whenever you're able to hit those certain requirements that I'm looking for, honestly.
Interesting. So you do have specific requirements for some of these metrics, like you said, that you have deemed valuable for the sport of baseball or whatever sport you're working with. Once you feel that there's sort of like a, like you said, they meet the threshold or they meet that requirement. And, you obviously allow them to then move on and sort of graduate for lack of better terms. What are some of the, I'm sure you obviously mentioned the biomotor qualities of baseball, right? We're generally living in that world of, physical speed and power, right? If that is the case, now that you've, like you said, step one, you're having the conversation with the coach. Step two, you got some data to provide what you're doing. Step three, you're starting to bucket these guys into where you see them fit. And then, step four, I guess you could argue, would be making sure that they're actually reaching and achieving and advancing in some of these biomotor abilities, right? In order to kind of move on from phase to phase or foundation to foundation. What are some of the specific things that you think you're doing in order to help them progress in those areas? Maybe it be specific exercise that you identify as necessary to meet the requirements. Do you have like specific buckets for those biomotor abilities? Are you looking at like, hey, like here's how we're going to progress? We know we're going to get you faster in a general sense. We're going to get you more powerful in a general sense, right? We're going to build your strength or general strength in a general sense, right? Is it kind of like bucket those and then maybe kind of move in a direction where you're starting to specify a little bit to, like, for example, I guess my question to kind of put this all together is, say you want to obviously get the athlete faster. I'm going to have them sprint, but if you're going to have them sprint, right, obviously sprinting in baseball is slightly different, right? Or a lot different, right? Then it would be just sprint in a straight line in a nice, cute, neat fashion where you're getting cues and getting coached up, right? So like, do you kind of start, I guess, to like, go back to, it's like, after I bucket them and after they move up, it's like, what are the specific metrics that I am bucketing them into? And then how am I kind of like grooving it as I weave them through this progression, in the developmental process for baseball?
Yeah, honestly. So once I do that, then I actually go back to the sport coaches. So we're also fortunate enough here where we have a bunch of technology on the baseball side. So we have like Rapsodo, TrackMan, like these like blast motion, like bat sensors. Like, so we have so many things to track, like exit velocity off of the bat, like distance stuff off of hit tracks. So we have all the stuff that obviously that the pitching staff uses and all that kind of stuff too. So I actually go back to the sport coaches and start having conversation with them and seeing what they're seeing what they think that the athletes need to get better at their skill that they're lacking in. So like even
That's
in like
awesome.
especially like the hitting perspective too, like obviously like the guys who are like, you know, from a max strength portion, like they could be like at the top of the team of like the heaviest load they can lift and all that kind of stuff. But on the other end of the spectrum, like over on the cages, like they might have like a very slow bat speed or something like that. So like we have the technology to be able to kind of see where the guys are lacking in. And then I start to have conversations with the sport coaches and seeing what they think that the athletes need. And then I try and like, I mean, it's hard again, because like it's such like a small change in what or small, like, I'm trying to find the word. It's like, it might be just a small fix of what the athlete needs. And sometimes the sport coach doesn't understand, or the terminology they need. Cause like one thing I was asking the pitching coach, because one of the kids was like, oh, like, yeah, I think Dylan just needs like some more proprioception work. And I'm like, I don't really know what you're trying to say on that. But then I asked him to explain a little bit further, and how is like his single leg strength and balance on that one side that he's driving off of is a little bit lacking compared to the others. And we can start to add things in to build that up. So that's kind of like that last step, is really trying to see how all the KPIs that are rising relates back to the KPIs that the sport coaches are tracking. Because I think that in baseball, there's more data tracking than probably any other sport.
Really?
Yeah, in college athletics, just based off of the technology that we have and everything like that too. Because, you know, like football obviously uses catapult and all that stuff, but like literally every time that any of these baseball athletes are doing anything, they are being recorded and tracked, and their data is even being sent to scouts and stuff so that they can see. So like a lot of that stuff is super important. And we're fortunate enough to be in a department that has that, because our department's been able to fundraise a lot of money for that kind of stuff, and that really helps. But it's really all about going back to the coaches, seeing what they need, seeing what they're seeing on the field, and then trying to work together again. So it's kind of just a continuous loop, and seeing how that goes. You know? Yeah,
that's interesting. So, I mean, obviously the KPIs, I guess in this sense, would you agree would be the limiting factors for each position, right? Like eventually you're going to get to a point where you're saying, all right, well, depending on the position you play, obviously, you know, pretty much everybody outside of the pitcher is going to hit. So you're saying to yourself, well, you know, we know that bat speed is something that we consider to be an important metric, exit velocity for, you know, maybe outfielders or something to that effect, right? Like you have these specific on-field measurements, right, or measurables that you think are important, and you would categorize those as sort of like I like to use the word limiting factor, because I think it kind of just like breaks it down a little easier. Like for example, in football, obviously we know certain limiting factors for, you know, safeties or defensive backs, maybe tackling in open space or open field tackling, right? So it's like one of those things needs to be measured in some way, shape, or form. How do we kind of like create experiences in training to sort of replicate those things? So when it comes to those limiting factors for baseball, and you can get into even, so obviously you want to get into some soccer stuff as well, or softball, some of the things that you're doing specifically with your team to try to enhance those limiting factors, or have you gotten to a point where you can do that? And if you are, like, what are some of those things that you're doing to try to enhance the limiting factors for each position group?
Let's see. I think, well, I'll go back to soccer, because that's one thing that I've been working on a little bit more lately. One of those things is more so kind of what you just mentioned, is that open field agility. So like we're pretty fortunate right now where we just got a new weight room at the facility, at like their own practice facility. So like they have a soccer only weight room in their own fields, all in one facility. We're able to kind of have like a seamless transition in that, and it allows me to have a lot more time with them too. And that's one of the things I wasn't able to do with them last off season, just because just the logistics of getting around downtown Atlanta, where like I have 3 different weight rooms where I'm training like 3 different teams sometimes, and it's hard to get around. But this year, being having soccer, having their own weight room and allowing me to spend a lot more time with them, I've been able to hone in on that, and it's something that I've been trying to do a little bit more with them. So right now, like sometimes like we'll do some speed work on the front end. They'll go to their practice, and then they'll finish with me in the weight room, and that's kind of what I've been doing trying to add in on the beginning, on the front end of some of their like longer training session days when they're going do some like small sided games and stuff. I think one of the limiting factors that we've kind of identified throughout the course of the season with the coaching staff is one of them especially was our defenders like being having trouble tracking guys attacking the goal. So one thing that I'm trying to do right now, and I'm working with Jeff Davidson, one of our other sports performance coaches who's working with women's soccer, is that we were trying to think of different like scenarios and agility based, I guess, drills, if you would say, just to be able to mimic those demands and mimic those actions on the field. So and doing that right before, pretty much like as a warm up as well, in the warm up before they start practicing. I think that's something that will allow them to kind of keep that idea in their mind before the actual ball is being placed in front of them and having to learn that way.
Wow, that's so cool. Yeah, I love that. And that's actually the exact answer I was looking for, kind of hoping you would head in that direction, because it's so interesting to me. Like I think, obviously the theme of what we've been talking about so far, just to kind of bring it all together is the idea of working backwards from the sport and being able to figure out what the demands are. I think there's a massive push. I don't know if massive, I guess maybe just in my opinion and what I've seen and heard lately, it seems like there's a decent emphasis to try to get people to understand and evaluate sport in that fashion, right? A lot of people say the terms, right? You say the phrase, work backwards from the sport, right? And I think, Charlie Francis did a good job of kind of outlining different ways to do it, right? Like not watching the ball, watching the players, watching their movements and all that kind of stuff. But what I think Fergus Connolly's done an incredible job with, obviously, and Cam Jost and the process and Game Changer, is really emphasizing the idea. And it's so beautiful, and its simplicity is just simply watching the game and then trying to recreate those experiences. Now, I think what you're doing is interesting because it's getting to a point where, yes, you're recreating the experiences, but you also know that there's sort of like micro experiences within that larger experience, right? So you're trying to like figure out ways to like slot it in there. So if you can, and I promise, like whatever your answer is, I already know it's going to be phenomenal, but I just want you to kind of like explain what you are thinking when you are watching some of these experiences take place. Like, what's the filter that's like going through in your mind? It's like, because I watch soccer all the time, and I'm a huge soccer fan, and I think soccer is probably one of the more interesting sports to watch when you're trying to look at this lens, or look through this lens, right, of recreating the experiences. So what is the filter, right? And I think this will kind of like bring it all home, right? The idea of like starting with like really trying to identify what's important to the sport coach, and then working all the way to like really just take a look at experiences and then break them down into their like micro parts, I guess you could say, like their components, and then kind of build back into the full experience, right? Like what do you, like when you guys talk and you guys are, strategizing, like what does that sound like? What does it look like?
So for it's a little unique because me and Jeff both actually came from Elon before we were here. So we were within that department. And what we did when we were there was that we had different categories for certain agility drills that we had, and we kind of separated them into different ways that we saw like opponents trying to move in an open field. So on the defensive side, at least, this is what I'm kind of looking at for soccer, is that like the defender has to be able to mirror and chase. So mirroring, obviously, just being able to stay in front of the opponent where the direction they're going, and then chasing is that and if you get beat, being able to follow that line of direction wherever they're going. So with those, we just have a bunch of different constraints that we can add in. So like having the mirror, it can just be like two people just like it's like facing each other, like one person shuffling, the one reacting. And then you can make it more complex by adding a barrier in between so they can obstruct their vision, or you can add people in between to obstruct their vision. So you can do 2-on-2, and then like 1-on-1 here, and then 1-on-1 here. So it's like a 2-on-2 type of scenario. And then you can do the same thing when it comes to chase. So that was kind of a big thing too, that we saw in like the last couple of games of the season, is that we were unable to, especially on like free kicks or corners, to I guess cover the attackers that are coming into the box while people are taking corner kicks and they're trying to get a header into the goal or make a play on the ball. So that was one of the things that I pretty much add into our warm. So like one variation of a mirror drill and then one variation of a chaser drill. And again, trying to add and change like the complexity and add and change different constraints to those over the course of the week, just making it from general to complex, just like we normally would, like in the weight room. So it's a similar idea of that,
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. And I think just to clarify, would you say, and I guess like I view constraints as a way to just simply limit, like sort of, you know, like you said, whether you want to break it down or whether you want to build it up or whatever. Like in my eyes, the constraints in this particular instance, could they also be viewed as a intensity limiter, right? Like obviously there's a certain point where, you know, you providing the full experience is going to provide the full amount of stress, right? So in order for you to really kind of like limit and scale the intensity at which you're exposing the athletes to. So I think that that's something that, you know, is important to also understand as we start to move in a direction in this field where we're really understanding the sport. And obviously listening to you talk, you've done a ton of homework just watching the sport, right? And you're curious and you're trying to do the best that you can to provide for your athletes. And everybody appreciates that. So when you do that, now it's like, okay, well, here's the experience. Here's how I can recreate it. But I think it's important to probably look at it in the same lens that you would look at any sort of training model or training cycle that you're putting together. Where it's like, well, I need to scale this in some way, shape, or form, right? I need to kind of gradually build and expose them to the. So I think identifying for the audience just what you think of when you're thinking of like constraints, right? Like different ways to manipulate the drill, right? Like what are some of those things that you guys try to play around with just to make sure that you're, you know, gradually exposing the athlete? And I think it's important for sport coaches too, to understand that, right? Like it's not always just throwing the full load at them, right?
No, I mean, what you just said was perfect. Like the space in general, but that's one of the biggest things that I changed. Besides adding complexity to the drill and adding more people into it, is by adding space. So obviously, the biggest thing that like you can do is like a full field chase, like down from end line to end line. But that's it's a little bit too much, like too stressful. And if you're trying to allow them to learn and react to certain things and just focus on one thing at a time, like I feel like you need a smaller space. So that's what I kind of do. I over time, like not only just add complexity to it, but just increasing space and increasing that will allow the guy on offense to be able to have more opportunities to create space, which will just make it harder for the defender. And just adding that will do it by itself. And it's definitely something that one of like it's my coaching the men's side. He does very well. Like when these first couple of weeks of spring ball, and we've only been doing small sided games pretty much for that exact reason. Not only just to mitigate the amount of stress that they're running up and down the field, but to also focus on very small, like specific things in their game without worrying about the fatigue and the stress on their body as well. So I think that's something that me and my men's soccer coach are having common in our way of thinking, at least. And it's really great to have somebody that's on the same page with you, working on the same team.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And yeah, just having those conversations. I know there's probably a lot of strength coaches out there right now thinking, man, like I really wish I was able to have that line of connection, that line of communication with my sport coach. I've got good ideas, and I've got, you know, it's a reality, right? It's a reality of the industry, right? There's unfortunately there's probably a lot of people listening to this podcast that don't have the opportunity to have some of the input that you're describing, right? But definitely have the desire to, the same wherewithal that you're providing here when it comes to trying to, you know, find the answers and do what's best for the athlete. But for those who are a little more curious as to what you're describing, can you just give some definitions of the general to specific when it comes to some of the drills that you're describing, right? I think you just kind of outlined like something like smaller space to larger space kind of thing. But when you take a look at general versus specific or closed space, open space, smaller space, larger space, strength oriented versus velocity oriented, whatever the case may be. Would you agree that, you know, some of those things are kind of falling in line with the way you view and try to like manipulate some of these experiences as well?
Absolutely. And like the technology aspect is super helpful too, because like in football, like at least when I was at Elon, we were able to see like, all right, like in game, like when we're actually playing against like actual opponents who are trying to defeat us, like what are the miles per hour or the speeds that we're actually hitting? And then like that's kind of that's where the end of like the specific spectrum is. Like we want to hit our max velocity and our agility drills and our routes that we run or whatever at those velocities. And so we can kind of work backwards by not allowing them to, again, like gain as much distance to reach those, or putting more restrictions on them to get to that level. But it's a little bit, I guess it's a little bit harder when I'm thinking about like from like the baseball standpoint, just because it's like, you're not really the agility aspect is not really there, or you're not really reacting to another person that's trying to like manipulate your space or anything like that. You're just reacting to a ball. So it's a little bit difficult to kind of explain on the baseball side, but at least that's how I see it from like a field sports stance, you know?
Sure. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that. I just want to make sure that we're clear. And I think it's super interesting. Like, I think the idea that you're taking just training concepts, right, but also what you are essentially manipulating, right? A lot of times, right, you know, especially for young strength coaches, they get into the field, they look at ways that they can manipulate the weight room, right, and they kind of work from the weight room out. And you know, I think I was just as guilty of that as anybody else who started off in their, like, you know, late teens, early 20s, right? It's just you thought the weight room was the only thing that actually mattered, and you didn't realize that, like, how small of a tool and how, like, you know, kind of like such a pedestrian quality strength is, right? Like, it's there's so much more to it, right? But I think it's important to kind of identify that, hey, like, you can take those same concepts, right, that you kind of went through when you're trying to, you know, periodize the weight room, you know, for lack of better terms, and when you're creating these experiences for the athlete, and whether it be, you know, open field agility in your particular instance, or movement skill, if you will, whether it be speed variations or anything to that effect, you're actually putting them in a position, and you're, again, just simply doing exactly what you would do in the weight room. You're just providing some progressive overload, I guess you could say, to those. One question I do have about the speeds that you mentioned. So kind of a rule of thumb that I tried to go with in football was that I didn't want Saturdays to be the first time that the athlete would feel their max velocity, or whatever the top speed they were going to hit during that week. So obviously you just talked about speed a little bit and the different ways that you kind of manipulated. And obviously speed in itself is I feel like there's a massive emphasis in that in the field as well, which is good. But again, understanding game speed a little bit more. Do you feel that there's value and do you guys try to provide exposure to certain speeds or a certain percentage of their top velocity in either sport, like throughout the week prior to heading into the game? Do you guys try to live within like a certain range so that you don't expose them to that? I guess my question was built around the idea of, you know, creating that robustness and resilience. So that way on Saturday, it's like, hey, first time I hit 21 miles an hour isn't, you know, when I'm chasing someone down because, you know, our defense broke down, right? Like something along those lines.
Yeah. I've worked on this a little bit more with baseball than soccer, but I am going to have this conversation with soccer once we start playing some spring balls. But on the baseball side, yeah, that's exactly what I was kind of worried about. It's like when they do their inner squads, like coming up the next couple of weekends, and then when they do when they play their first couple of games, like, yeah, I don't want to have that first time, like being their first time exposed to those speeds again after not having trained it, because like I honestly, like in season too, like I don't really have an opportunity to actually train speed for them, because of the logistics, having their practice facility a half hour away on the highway, like it's a little bit difficult based off the time that we have, and it's not conducive to their training. So one thing that I've been doing is talking to the position coach for the especially for the outfielders, about having them hit certain buildups throughout the week. So like, because like they've all done like buildup sprints with me before their main sprint days as well. And so like I've made like the outfielders and the position coaches help me along with this too. Like I've had them do some buildup sprints within their warm up that are actually like close to about 95% intensity.
Okay.
And on certain days having a little bit more volume than others. So like, yes, they'll always do buildups before each like actual full practice, but then as well, like I'm trying to like teach like the staff about kind of like the high-low model, that what we've been doing in the off season on my end at least, and we're trying to kind of mimic that in their practice as well. So like right now, especially for the position players, one thing they're doing on their like quote unquote high day on, I think it's either a Tuesday or Wednesday, is that they're doing some pretty relatively like higher volume like base running drills. Whether it just be from like home plate to first, or actually going through for a couple at a time. But it's a way for them to get their skill of base running in while also being exposed to that max velocity of running, especially in the outfielders who are chasing balls down like left and right. Yeah. That they need to be exposed to a little bit more, and like they are able just to have a little bit higher volumes than the infielders. But like having those conversations with the position coach this year has been super helpful, because I think that's going to help us down the stretch when we are actually used to it, because we're right now, like our high days when we're planning out our practices in this preseason, our high days are going to be on on Wednesdays and like Fridays and Saturdays, because that's how our games during the season look. Like that's how our game schedule looks throughout the season. So we're trying to get the guys used to having those high days on those days, and then having really like great low recovery days on the days in between. So it's one thing that we're working on right now that's hopefully going to pay off once the season starts.
That's really interesting, actually. And I want to make sure we comment on that, because I think that's a very creative way to look at it, taking a look at when the stress is going to be provided in season and then trying to create an off-season plan that mimics that in a way. And I know that sounds really simple in nature, but if you think about it, I mean, a lot of like training in general doesn't really accomplish that. I mean, think about like football, for example, right? You play on Saturdays, and a lot of college football programs will train Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Yeah. Maybe they're training Monday, maybe they're having some like 6 smaller sessions a week, and maybe they actually get some working on Saturday, but trying to create some, rhythm, behavioral pattern like within the body. I think it's easier said than done. It's not always easy to do, but I do think there is something to be said about setting up your training week to mimic not even just like what's going to be done, but like the type of stress that they will eventually be experiencing, 8 to 9 weeks down the road once the season actually kicks in. So that's a super creative way to look at that. And I definitely appreciate that. I'm glad you brought that up. We're coming up on about an hour now. So I just wanted to give you a chance to, obviously just to kind of round this thing out. I really think that you did a great job of outlining specifically ways that young coaches like yourself can get yourself in a situation where you're speaking with the head coach. You guys are talking about developing a universal language, identifying what's important to the athlete, what's important to the strength coach, what the limiting factors are of the sport. And then obviously you took us through all the different kind of like, so the sequence of events that you go through in your mind, trying to visualize the sport, create a preparation plan for the sport, and obviously to meet those demands. So along with that, do you feel that there are any resources that you can provide for some of our listeners as far as, I mean, it could be books, podcasts, just individuals that you think would be able to, that some of these people can reach out to talk to get more information on this, obviously including yourself. So if you want to throw your social media out there and all that kind of stuff, email, whatever you can, but yeah, just where can we get some more of this information out there so some of the young coaches can really start to work on developing that relationship, work on understanding how to filter the game and understand the sport, and then obviously everything that comes from there.
Yeah, one of the greatest books that was ever recommended to me was Creativity Inc. by Ed Catmull, the founder and CEO of Pixar, and it just talks about how they've created such a welcoming and open like environment for honestly creativity to flow within departments and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's one of the best books I've read about just how to properly just like communicate and treat people. And I think that's something that a lot of young coaches aren't exposed to when they're, going through all these internships. Like they're learning like the X's and O's of programming, of designing like a whole annual plan and how to actually coach in front of a group. All that stuff is really great, but it's really hard to implement what you've learned if you're going through all these barriers and that like a sport coach isn't allowing you to do. And one of the things that I think interns aren't really exposed to is actually learning how to communicate effectively with sport coaches and being able to be patient, because like we all have the same goal in mind. It's just to win games and allow our athletes to be play at the best of their ability. And I think that sometimes like the communication and the relationship building gets in the way of that. Because I know a lot of strength coaches that I've worked with sometimes have butt heads with other sport coaches too. And there's always that like separation. All that coach wants this, but I want this instead because he doesn't know what he's doing. But it's also like, the sport coaches don't know what they don't know. So it's you kind of have to be patient with that. And I'm going through that with like a new coach at softball right now too, because like when she first came in, she was like, like for softball, she was like, I think it'd be pretty great for like the girls to run the beep test and run a mile test for conditioning and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, that's a pretty cool idea. I haven't really thought about that before. And then just having conversations, like, why do you want to do this? Like, she's like, just to assess their fitness level and all that stuff. And then just kind of just being able to be patient and just kind of questioning why and why and why. And eventually that there will become to a point where they're like, all right, well, maybe there's other ways to be doing this. Like, what do you have in mind? Like certain things,
right.
Like, you just have to be patient about it. And it's hard to do especially if you're hopping from school to school and you're having just like 2 or 3 years of experience somewhere here and you're not able to really build those relationships because you're just seeing new staffs all the time. And it's hard to do because like our field is just so saturated, and there's going to be so much other better paying jobs that if you have an opportunity to go to, like, yeah, a lot of people are going to take that. And it's something that is obviously like, yeah, you definitely should, but it's a hard thing to do to kind of stay in one place in this profession that I'm seeing right now. And it's, so if anyone does, have a desire to do that in our field, I would recommend reaching out to people who've done that already. So like, people who've been at like one place for numbers of years, and just really just seeing how they've done that and how they've made themselves happy enough to do that. And then there's a bunch of people that have done that, just looking up their bios and stuff. And it's every time I see those, I'm like, wow, it's like super impressive that like, not only were you able to be this successful, but you're able to do this at one place for so many years. Like, that's so impressive to me. And there's not a lot of people like that anymore, but it's pretty cool when you come across one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a great, it's a great piece of advice, right? If you're really looking for the answers as to how you can create and establish a little bit more longevity in this particular field, especially at the collegiate and professional levels, why not reach out to the people who have done that and ask them what they did in order to be able to achieve that. So, yeah, that's awesome. We really appreciate it, man. You killed it. This is a great opportunity, I think, for both of us, obviously, to get to connect. But this is a great opportunity, I think, for all of our listeners to be able to get some quality information on how to better establish coaching connections and obviously, establish a line of communication between yourself and the sport coaches. So, you got a Twitter, Instagram, or anywhere people can follow you?
It's my first full name is Ammasi. It's AMMASITH. Not very good on social media, but I am trying to get better. So it's one thing I'm trying to do this year, getting better, but putting some content in my athletes.
All right. That's awesome. Well, appreciate the time. We'll talk in a little bit, but again, thank you and best of luck moving forward.
Thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate it.
All right. You have a great day.